Imagine waking up 80,000 years ago. There are no cities, no roads, no books, no language as we know it. The only sounds around you are birds, insects, and the distant calls of animals hidden in the darkness. Every single day is about survival, finding food, avoiding predators, staying alive until sunrise. But there's one thing that separates your tribe from almost every other creature on Earth: a fire. As night falls, your family gathers around glowing flames. The fire keeps dangerous animals away. It cooks your food. It gives you warmth during freezing nights. It turns the darkness into something a little less terrifying. For ancient humans, fire wasn't just a tool. It was the center of life. Yet hidden inside those dancing flames was something nobody could have predicted, something that would slowly become part of human history for thousands of years: smoke. Today, when we hear the word smoking, we immediately think of cigarettes, cigars, or tobacco. But those things are incredibly recent compared to the age of humanity. Long before tobacco farms, long before civilizations, and even long before the first written language, ancient humans were already surrounded by smoke every single day. The real question isn't when tobacco was invented. The real question is, when did humans realize that smoke itself could change the way they felt? No one knows the exact moment. There are no ancient books describing it, no cave paintings showing the first person taking a deliberate breath of smoke. But archaeology, anthropology, and human behavior allow us to piece together a fascinating story. And, surprisingly, it probably began by complete accident. Think about what life around a prehistoric campfire actually looked like. People didn't burn clean pieces of dried wood like we do today. They threw almost everything into the fire: dry branches, leaves, grass, tree bark, animal dung, resin, sometimes entire bushes. Every region had different plants growing nearby. Some burned with thick white smoke. Others released powerful scents. Some barely smoked at all. Ancient humans had no idea that plants contained hundreds of different natural chemicals. They simply noticed something strange. Certain fires felt different. One night the smoke smelled sweet. Another night it smelled bitter. Sometimes it made your eyes burn. Sometimes it made everyone unusually calm. Other times people felt more alert, more relaxed, or strangely quiet. At first, these changes probably meant nothing, but humans are incredibly good at recognizing patterns. That single ability helped us become the dominant species on Earth. When something happened once, it could be luck. When it happened 10 times, people started paying attention. Our ancestors weren't scientists, but they were expert observers. They knew which berries were poisonous, which animals migrated during different seasons, which rivers flooded first, which trees attracted insects. They survived because they remembered tiny details. So imagine discovering that every time a certain plant accidentally burned, people reacted differently. You wouldn't know anything about chemistry. You wouldn't know about nicotine, or cannabinoids, or essential oils. But you would know one simple thing: that plant does something. And curiosity has always been one of humanity's greatest strengths. Maybe someone intentionally threw that same plant into the fire the next night. Not because they wanted to smoke, because they wanted answers. The result may have been one of the earliest human experiments. No laboratories, no equipment, just observation, action, memory, and curiosity. This is something many people forget about ancient humans. They weren't primitive in the way movies often portray them. They didn't spend every waking moment running away from predators. They explored, they experimented, they solved problems, they passed knowledge from one generation to another. In many ways, that curiosity became humanity's greatest survival tool. Imagine discovering a berry that tastes good. You tell your children, they tell theirs. Thousands of years later, everyone knows that berry is safe. The same thing could have happened with smoke. One generation notices a certain plant produces a pleasant smell. The next generation deliberately burns it. Eventually, burning that plant becomes tradition. Not because anyone understood the science, because experience had already proven it mattered. There's another reason smoke may have fascinated ancient humans. Unlike sight or sound, smoke surrounds you. It fills the air. It enters your lungs without asking permission. Even if you tried to avoid it, sitting beside a fire meant breathing it in. And breathing is deeply connected to how our bodies react to the world. Certain smells trigger memories instantly. Others calm us. Some warn us about danger. Others signal safety. Ancient humans depended on these senses far more than we do today. A strange smell wasn't just interesting. It could mean food, medicine, rain, danger, or opportunity. That made smoke impossible to ignore. Some researchers believe the first intentionally burned plants weren't chosen because they changed the mind. They were chosen because they solved practical problems. Fresh green leaves created thick smoke that drove insects away. Sticky tree resins produced pleasant aromas while keeping bugs out of camps. Certain herbs helped preserve meat by surrounding it with fragrant smoke. Others masked the scent of humans from dangerous animals. If ancient people repeatedly burned these plants for practical reasons, eventually they would notice something unexpected. Different plants created different experiences. Some made people cough, others made them relaxed, others produced surprisingly pleasant aromas over hundreds or thousands of years. Those observations slowly became knowledge. Fire itself changed human evolution. Cooking made food easier to digest. Warmth allowed humans to survive colder climates. Nighttime gatherings strengthened families. Stories were shared around flames. Knowledge was passed from elders to children. Some anthropologists even argue that human culture truly began around campfires. If that's true, then smoke wasn't just floating above those fires. It became part of every conversation, every celebration, every funeral, every successful hunt. Every dangerous winter, every new generation, smoke became woven into daily life long before anyone gave it a name. Of course, not every plant was safe. Nature has never been kind to careless experimentation. Some plants contain chemicals that heal. Others contain chemicals that kill. Ancient humans probably learned this through painful experience. Someone burns the wrong plant. People become sick. That plant is never used again. Another plant creates a pleasant smell. People remember it. Knowledge slowly grows, trial by trial, generation after generation. This wasn't science as we know it, but it was the beginning of systematic learning, the same process that eventually led humans to farming, medicine, and civilization itself. What's remarkable is that this story isn't really about smoking. It's about something much bigger. The human desire to experiment, to ask questions, to repeat unusual experiences. Every major discovery in history started with curiosity: fire, tools, agriculture, metalworking, medicine, even space travel. At some point, someone simply wondered, what happens if I try this? Ancient smoke may have been one of humanity's earliest examples of exactly that kind of thinking. Not addiction, not recreation, curiosity. And curiosity has changed the world more times than we can count. But accidental discoveries rarely stay accidental forever. Eventually, humans began choosing specific plants, not just because they burned well, but because they believed those plants carried power. Some were used in healing rituals, others in ceremonies, some during funerals, others before hunting. Slowly, smoke stopped being just part of the fire. It became part of human culture itself, and that transformation would spread across continents. Long before tobacco ever appeared, by the time humans had mastered fire, something else had quietly changed. Fire was no longer just a survival tool. It had become a gathering place. Every evening, families sat around the same flames. Hunters shared stories. Elders taught children. Plans were made for tomorrow's hunt. Celebrations and mourning all happened in the same place, and floating above every one of those moments was smoke. At first, smoke was simply unavoidable, but over thousands of years, people began to notice something remarkable. Not all smoke was the same. Some plants released a fresh, calming scent. Others produced thick clouds that made insects disappear. Some created an aroma that lingered on clothes and skin for days. Without understanding chemistry, ancient people slowly learned that every plant had its own personality. That knowledge didn't come from books. It came from experience. Every generation added a little more. Every mistake became a lesson. Every successful discovery became tradition. As humans spread across Africa, Europe, Asia, and eventually the Americas, they entered completely different environments. Each region introduced them to new trees, new herbs, New flowers, new resins, new roots. Naturally, every culture experimented with what grew around them. A tribe living in a dense forest would burn different plants than people living in open grasslands. Desert communities discovered aromatic shrubs that survived harsh climates. Mountain tribes found herbs growing high above the valleys. Without ever meeting each other, people across the world were reaching the same conclusion. Some plants were worth burning on purpose, not because they produced the biggest fire, but because they changed the experience around the fire. This is where smoke slowly stopped being ordinary. Imagine preparing for a dangerous hunt. Everyone is nervous. Nobody knows if they will return alive. Before leaving, the group throws fragrant plants into the fire. The smoke rises into the morning air. Everyone breathes it together. Whether the smoke actually changed anything or not almost didn't matter. The ritual itself created confidence. It united the group. It marked the beginning of something important. Anthropologists believe rituals like these helped early societies stay connected. Shared actions build trust. When everyone participates in the same ceremony, they begin feeling like part of something larger than themselves. Smoke became more than air. It became a symbol. As human societies became more organized, these rituals grew more complex. Instead of burning random plants, people began selecting specific ones for specific occasions. Certain herbs were burned during births, others during funerals, some before battles, others during harvest celebrations. The smoke itself became part of the ceremony. Across many ancient cultures, people believed rising smoke carried messages upward, prayers, gratitude, requests for protection. Even without written language, the image was powerful. Smoke rose into the sky and disappeared beyond sight. To ancient minds, it looked as though their words were traveling somewhere beyond the human world. Whether those beliefs were true wasn't the point. They shaped entire civilizations. Long before modern medicine, people also searched nature for healing. Some plants were boiled into teas, others were crushed into pastes, and some were burned. Certain aromatic plants opened the nose and made breathing easier. Others helped mask terrible smells from sickness or death. Some released oils that naturally discouraged insects, reducing disease around camps. Ancient healers didn't know about bacteria. They didn't know about viruses, but they observed results. If a patient recovered after a certain ritual enough times, people remembered. Knowledge spread, not through science journals, but through stories. One fascinating thing about ancient humans is that they rarely separated medicine from spirituality. Today, we think of doctors and religious leaders as different people. Thousands of years ago, they were often the same. The person who understood healing herbs also led ceremonies. The smoke rising from medicinal plants wasn't only believed to heal the body. It was thought to restore balance to the spirit. This idea appeared independently across many civilizations. That tells us something important. Humans everywhere were trying to answer the same questions. How do we heal? How do we protect ourselves? How do we understand the invisible world around us? Smoke became one possible answer. Eventually, different civilizations developed their own traditions. In ancient Egypt, fragrant resins filled temples during religious ceremonies. In India, sacred herbs became part of spiritual practices that continued for thousands of years. In China, aromatic plants were burned inside homes and temples for both practical and ceremonial purposes. Across parts of Europe, evergreen branches and herbs filled the air during seasonal festivals. Meanwhile, in the Americas, entirely different plants became central to local traditions. Each civilization believed its own practices were unique. Yet all of them shared one surprising habit. They deliberately surrounded themselves with smoke. Different plants, different beliefs, the same human instinct. This raises an interesting question. Why were humans so drawn to smoke in the first place? Part of the answer may lie inside the human brain itself. Our sense of smell is directly connected to memory and emotion. One familiar scent can instantly transport us back years. The smell of rain, fresh bread, a campfire, these reactions happen automatically. Ancient humans experienced the same thing. A certain smell may have reminded them of safety, another of family, another of successful hunts. Over time, those smells became emotionally powerful. Burning the same plants again recreated those feelings. Without realizing it, humans were building emotional traditions around scent. Of course, not every culture used smoke for spiritual reasons. Many practical uses continued as well. Smoke kept mosquitoes away during warm nights. It protected stored food from insects. It helped preserve meat. It discouraged wild animals from approaching camps. Some communities even used smoke to communicate across long distances. A column of smoke rising into the sky could signal danger, or success, or the arrival of visitors. Smoke wasn't only inhaled, it became one of humanity's earliest communication technologies. Thousands of years passed, civilizations rose, empires appeared, trade routes connected distant cultures, ideas began traveling farther than ever before. Plants that grew in one region slowly reached another. Knowledge spread alongside them. People discovered new herbs, new resins, new ceremonial traditions. Yet one plant remained almost completely unknown outside a single part of the world: tobacco. For most of human history, the people of Europe had never seen it. The people of Africa had never grown it. The people of Asia had never smoked it. Tobacco belonged to another continent entirely. And when the rest of the world finally encountered it, history would change forever. For thousands of years, humans had been burning plants, not because they wanted cigarettes, not because they understood nicotine, and certainly not because they knew anything about addiction. They burned plants because fire was already part of life. Some plants smelled pleasant, others kept insects away, some became symbols of healing, protection, or spiritual connection. But then, one particular plant changed history forever: tobacco. Unlike many herbs used across Europe, Africa, and Asia, tobacco was native to the Americas. That meant for tens of thousands of years, entire civilizations lived without ever seeing it. When indigenous communities across North and South America discovered tobacco, they didn't treat it as an everyday habit. They treated it with respect. For many tribes, tobacco wasn't simply a plant. It was sacred. It appeared during important ceremonies. It was offered during prayers, used while making peace between groups, and sometimes carried before major decisions. Smoking wasn't entertainment. It was communication, not with other people, but with something they believed existed beyond the physical world. Different tribes developed different traditions. Some dried tobacco leaves, others mixed them with local herbs. Some burned them inside simple pipes. Others used ceremonial fires. The methods changed, but one idea remained almost identical. Smoke carried meaning. Watching smoke slowly disappear into the sky felt symbolic. It was something humans across cultures had noticed for thousands of years. The smoke rose. The message followed. Whether those messages reached anyone, no one could ever prove. But belief is powerful, and belief has shaped human history just as much as facts. Then came one of history's biggest turning points. Around the end of the 15th century, European explorers reached the Americas. Everything they saw seemed unfamiliar. New animals, new foods, new plants. And among those discoveries, they noticed local people doing something strange. People were deliberately breathing smoke from burning leaves. To many Europeans, the practice looked unusual. Some thought it was medicine. Others thought it was a religious ceremony. Curiosity quickly took over. It didn't take long before visitors tried it themselves. Few people realized that this single moment would eventually transform global history. Within only a few generations, tobacco crossed oceans. Seeds traveled on ships. Farmers began growing it. Merchants realized it could be sold. Demand increased. Trade expanded. Soon, tobacco was moving through ports across Europe, Africa, and Asia. What had once been a sacred plant used by specific communities slowly became an international commodity. This wasn't just the spread of a plant. It was the birth of an industry. As tobacco became easier to obtain, its role changed completely. Ceremonies became habits. Occasional use became daily use. Something once connected to rituals slowly entered ordinary life. People smoked while working, while talking, while traveling, while relaxing. The meaning behind smoking quietly shifted. It was no longer always about spirituality. Sometimes it became fashion, sometimes status, sometimes simple routine. History often works this way. Ideas change as they move between cultures. Centuries later, another invention accelerated everything: machines. Instead of preparing tobacco by hand, factories began producing cigarettes on a massive scale. What once required time and effort could now be made by the millions. Prices dropped, availability increased, advertising exploded, smoking appeared in newspapers, on posters, in films, even celebrities promoted it. For a while, many people believed smoking represented confidence, sophistication, and success. Few understood the long-term consequences. As scientific research advanced, doctors began discovering something worrying. People who smoked heavily often developed serious illnesses far more frequently than those who didn't. Over time, the evidence became impossible to ignore. Smoking was no longer viewed simply as tradition. It had become a major public health issue. Governments introduced warning labels. Advertising rules changed. Public awareness grew. The world slowly began separating two very different ideas: ancient ceremonial smoke and modern commercial smoking. Although they share one word, their purposes could hardly be more different. When we look back at the story, it's easy to imagine ancient humans making the same choices people make today. But they weren't. The first people experimenting with smoke weren't searching for a dangerous habit. They were exploring their environment. They observed nature, tested ideas, learned through experience. Everything they discovered became part of human knowledge. Some discoveries improved survival. Others created traditions. A few changed history forever. Smoke happened to do all three. Perhaps that's the most fascinating part of this entire story. Smoking didn't suddenly appear one afternoon. There wasn't one inventor. There wasn't one civilization. There wasn't even one plant. Instead, countless generations of curious people slowly built this behavior, piece by piece. One family noticed a fragrant herb. Another discovered a useful resin. A healer found a medicinal plant. A tribe created a ritual. A civilization adopted a tradition. Thousands of tiny discoveries eventually became one enormous human story. That's how most human history actually happened. Not through one genius, but through millions of ordinary people learning from the world around them. Today, when we see smoke rising from a campfire, it's easy to think of it as nothing more than burning wood. But for our ancestors, smoke meant warmth, protection, community, healing, memory, ceremony, and, sometimes, hope. Every evening around those ancient fires, stories were told beneath the stars. Children listened. Elders taught. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The smoke drifting into the night silently witnessed all of it. It connected families, marked important moments, and became part of traditions that lasted for thousands of years. So, how did ancient humans start smoking? The honest answer is, no one knows the exact day. There was no single inventor, no first cigarette, no written record. What archaeology suggests is something much more fascinating. Humans first learned to control fire, then they learned to understand plants. Then they noticed that different smoke produced different effects. Curiosity became experimentation. Experimentation became tradition. Tradition became culture. And thousands of years later, one simple act, breathing smoke, became one of the oldest and most surprising chapters in human history. Because sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't planned. They begin with a single question. What happens if we try this? And that question has been shaping humanity ever since.